The story begins with Copi, the narrator, immediately pulling the audience into a tense and suspenseful atmosphere. From the very first moments, there's an undertone of unease, suggesting that something significant and devastating has occurred within the family. She doesn't immediately dive into the details but carefully sets the stage by implying that the forthcoming revelations will be deeply personal and unsettling. Copi introduces her family, painting an initial picture of what seems like a typical and loving household. Her father, Gage, is described as a physically fit, hardworking man who owns a restaurant, while her mother, Yisa, is a literature teacher with a calm, nurturing presence. Growing up, Copi felt loved and secure. She recalls moments from her childhood where affection flowed naturally between her and her parents. This bond seemed healthy and solid, a foundation built on trust, care, and mutual respect. As Copi reflects on this time, it's clear that her childhood was marked by warmth, support, and protection. Her parents, though busy with their respective careers, always found time for her, fostering an environment where she could thrive. The love between her father and mother appeared to be unwavering, creating an ideal image of a stable family. There was nothing in her early years that suggested the darker turn her life would eventually take. As Copi matured, however, subtle changes began to occur, particularly in her relationship with her father. The transition from childhood to adolescence brought with it a new dynamic between her and Gage. At first, these changes seemed normal, the natural progression of a father-daughter bond evolving as Copi became a young woman. However, it soon became apparent that the once comfortable and loving connection was shifting into something more complex, and eventually, unsettling. What once were innocent displays of affection, like hugs or holding hands, began to carry an undercurrent of tension. Copi noticed that certain interactions with her father started to feel different, as if the boundaries between them were quietly but steadily being redefined. These small but significant moments began to pile up, creating confusion and discomfort in Copi's mind. She wasn't sure what to make of these changes at first. They weren't overtly inappropriate, yet there was an undeniable sense of awkwardness that seemed to creep into their exchanges. The affection felt familiar, but something about it was off, and this subtle shift started to weigh on her. Gage, too, appeared different. His demeanor, once light-hearted and protective, began to take on a more complex tone. He was still the loving father Copi had always known, but there were new layers of attention that felt more personal, more focused on her as an individual, not just as his daughter. Whether it was the lingering of his hand on her shoulder or the way his eyes followed her as she moved, Copi couldn't shake the feeling that something unspoken was happening between them. It's during this period that Copi's internal struggle began to intensify. The once clear and defined lines of their relationship were becoming blurred, leaving her uncertain about how to interpret her father's behavior. She found herself questioning whether she was overreacting or imagining things. After all, Gage had always been a loving and attentive father, so why did these moments now make her feel uneasy? This confusion began to seep into their daily interactions. Small, seemingly insignificant moments started to take on new meaning. A hug that lingered too long, a look that felt too intense, these were not the actions of a father and daughter who shared a purely platonic relationship. Copi knew deep down that something was wrong, but the weight of acknowledging it seemed too heavy to bear. As time passed, these uncomfortable feelings only grew. Copi became more aware of the tension that hung in the air whenever she was alone with her father. She began to distance herself emotionally, hoping that by doing so, things would return to normal. Yet, the distance only seemed to magnify the issue, creating a void that neither she nor her father could ignore. The complexity of these feelings is what makes the early stages of the story so compelling. Copi's uncertainty mirrors the confusion that many individuals experience when familial relationships begin to shift in ways that challenge boundaries. It's not always clear when affection crosses the line into something inappropriate, and this ambiguity is what heightens the tension in the story. Copi's internal conflict becomes the driving force behind the narrative in this first section. The audience is left to wonder what will happen next, knowing that something deeply troubling is on the horizon. Yet, for now, Copi remains trapped in a state of confusion, unable to fully comprehend or articulate the changes that are occurring between her and her father. This introduction effectively sets up the emotional and psychological groundwork for the more intense and disturbing developments that are to come. The stage is set for a familial bond that has begun to fray at the edges, with the once solid boundaries between father and daughter now dangerously close to collapsing. As the story progresses, Copi's reflections on these initial signs of discomfort will prove crucial in understanding the deeper consequences of what happens next. For now, the narrative leaves the reader with a sense of dread and anticipation, knowing that the breaking point is inevitable but unsure exactly when or how it will come. As Copi moves from adolescence into early adulthood, the subtle discomfort she felt around her father starts to solidify into something more tangible. The once innocent gestures of affection, hugs, touches, and looks, begin to take on a charged energy, and Copi can no longer ignore the growing tension between them. In their day-to-day interactions, there are no outright signs of wrongdoing. Gage, still the hard-working restaurant owner, goes about his business, but there is a noticeable shift in how he engages with Copi. He seems more attentive, more focused on her than before, and it's not the typical fatherly concern she's used to. When they are alone, the atmosphere becomes thick with unspoken emotions, and Copi finds herself becoming increasingly uncomfortable in his presence. The turning point comes one evening after a family dinner. Copi, Gage, and Yisa sit together at the dining table, enjoying a meal and casual conversation. Yisa, ever the caring mother, asks about Copi's studies and her plans for the future. It's a typical family scene, at least, on the surface. But beneath the smiles and laughter, there is a growing dissonance. Gage's eyes linger on Copi just a little too long, his hand brushing hers more than once as they reach for the same dish. These small gestures might seem innocuous to an outsider, but to Copi, they are laden with meaning. She's attuned to every subtle movement, every glance, and they are beginning to weigh heavily on her. After dinner, Yisa retires to bed early, exhausted from a long day at work. Gage and Copi remain at the table, the conversation continuing but the mood shifting as soon as they are alone. Copi, feeling the tension, tries to excuse herself, but Gage asks her to stay for a little longer, suggesting they open a bottle of wine and talk. Hesitant but not wanting to seem rude, Copi agrees. As the evening wears on, the wine flows, and the conversation becomes more intimate. They talk about life, dreams, and challenges, but there is an undercurrent of something deeper in their words. Gage begins to reminisce about Copi's childhood, talking about how much she has grown and how proud he is of the woman she has become. At first, these comments seem like the typical musings of a proud father, but as they continue, they take on a different tone, one that feels personal in a way that makes Copi uncomfortable. He compliments her appearance, telling her how beautiful she is, how much she reminds him of her mother when they first met. There's a strange intensity in his voice, and for the first time, Copi feels truly cornered by the situation. She tries to steer the conversation back to safer territory, but it's too late. The air between them has changed. It's then that Gage asks a question that shatters the fragile boundary that has been holding them back. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if things were different between us? Copi, startled, isn't sure how to respond. The question hangs in the air, heavy with implications that she doesn't want to face. She laughs it off, thinking that maybe he's just had too much wine, but Gage doesn't back down. His eyes, dark and serious, don't leave hers. "What do you mean, Dad?" she asks, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, though her heart is pounding in her chest. Gage leans in, his voice low. I mean, what if we weren't just father and daughter? What if there was more between us? In that moment, everything changes. The unspoken tension that has been building for months, possibly years, finally surfaces, and Copi is forced to confront the reality of what's happening. Her father is no longer just hinting at something inappropriate, he's outright suggesting it. The room feels like it's closing in on her as she tries to process his words. Copi's immediate reaction is shock, disbelief. This can't be happening. Gage, her father, the man she trusted more than anyone, is crossing a line that she never thought possible. She feels frozen, trapped by the weight of the moment and the overwhelming realization of what it means. I don't understand, Copi stammers, hoping that maybe she's misunderstood, that there's some other explanation. But Gage doesn't let her escape. He reaches for her hand, his touch gentle but firm, and says, "You know what I mean, Copi. We're close. We've always been close. Why should that change now?" Copi pulls her hand away, the reality of his words sinking in. This isn't a misunderstanding. Her father is crossing a boundary that should never be crossed, and she has no idea how to respond. A part of her wants to run, to get as far away from him as possible, but another part, the part that still loves and trusts him, can't fully comprehend the situation. I think I should go to bed, she says, her voice shaky as she stands up from the table, desperate to escape the situation. But before she can leave, Gage stands too, moving toward her with a calmness that terrifies her. "You don't have to be afraid," he says softly. "It's just us here. No one has to know." Copi feels her stomach churn as the weight of his words hits her. This isn't just an awkward moment, it's a violation of everything she thought she knew about her relationship with her father. She backs away, but Gage closes the distance between them, his hand reaching out to touch her arm. The moment stretches on, the tension unbearable, until finally, Copi finds the strength to pull away completely. "I'm going to bed," she says, her voice firmer now, though her heart is still racing. Without waiting for a response, she turns and leaves the room, her mind spinning with confusion, anger, and fear. Behind her, Gage watches her go, his face unreadable, but the weight of what has just happened lingers in the air like a dark cloud. As Copi lies in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she can't stop replaying the conversation in her head. How did it come to this? How did the man she trusted most become someone she feared? And more importantly, what would she do now? This moment marks the beginning of a downward spiral in their relationship. The once solid boundaries between father and daughter have been irrevocably crossed, and Copi knows that nothing will ever be the same again. The day after the unsettling conversation, Copi tries to go about her routine, hoping that things will somehow return to normal. She tells herself that maybe it was just a moment of confusion, that her father's words didn't mean what she feared they did. But deep down, she knows that everything has changed. She avoids Gage as much as possible that day, throwing herself into her work and other activities to keep her mind occupied. Every time she thinks about the night before, a wave of nausea washes over her. The tension in the house is palpable, though her mother, Yisa, seems blissfully unaware. Copi envies her mother's ignorance. If Yisa knew what had transpired between her husband and daughter, it would shatter her world. In the evening, Gage suggests they have dinner together again, just the two of them, as Yisa is out with friends. Copi hesitates, but she knows she can't avoid him forever. She agrees, hoping that they can have a normal, uneventful meal. Maybe they can pretend that nothing happened, and things can go back to the way they were before. At first, dinner proceeds in awkward silence. Gage tries to make small talk, but Copi's responses are brief and distant. She's hyper-aware of every movement he makes, every glance he throws her way. It feels like there's a ticking clock between them, counting down to something inevitable. After dinner, Gage suggests they move to the living room, where they can talk more comfortably. Copi, anxious and on edge, agrees, though every instinct in her body tells her to leave. As they sit down on the couch, the atmosphere grows even more tense. Gage is quiet at first, simply watching her, and Copi fidgets under his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, Gage breaks the silence. "Copi," he says softly, "about last night." Copi's breath catches in her throat. She doesn't want to have this conversation, but she knows it's unavoidable. "I don't want to talk about it," she replies, her voice tight and controlled. But Gage isn't deterred. "I think we need to," he says gently. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I was just trying to be honest with you." "Honest?" Copi's voice rises in disbelief. "You were suggesting," she cuts herself off, unable to finish the sentence, unable to even say the words out loud. The thought of it makes her stomach turn. "I wasn't suggesting anything," Gage insists, his tone calm and measured. "I was just trying to tell you how I feel." "How you feel?" Copi repeats, her voice shaky. "You're my father, Gage. This isn't right." Gage's expression softens, and for a moment, he looks almost vulnerable. "I know it's not what you expected," he says, "but feelings aren't always so simple. I've always loved you, Copi. You know that." "This isn't love," Copi snaps, her anger bubbling to the surface. "This is something else. Something wrong." Gage reaches for her hand, but she pulls away before he can touch her. "Copi, please, just listen to me," he pleads. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want us to be honest with each other. You felt it too, haven't you? The connection between us, it's always been there. It's more than just father and daughter." Copi feels like the room is spinning. How could he say these things so casually, as if this twisted version of their relationship is something normal, something acceptable? She stands up abruptly, her mind racing with panic. "I don't want to hear this," she says, backing away from him. I can't do this." Before she can leave, Gage stands and moves toward her, his expression desperate. "Copi, wait," he says, his voice urgent. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to understand how I feel." "I don't want to understand," Copi shouts, her voice breaking. Tears well up in her eyes as she backs away from him. "This isn't right. This isn't normal." Gage takes another step toward her, and for the first time, she feels genuinely afraid. His presence is suffocating, and the walls of the living room seem to close in around her. "Please, just calm down," Gage says, his voice still eerily calm. "We can talk about this. We can figure it out." But Copi doesn't want to figure it out. She just wants to escape. She turns and heads for the door, her heart racing as panic floods her system. Gage follows her, but before he can reach her, she bolts from the house, running as fast as she can down the driveway and into the night. Outside, the cool evening air hits her like a shock, and she breathes in deeply, trying to calm her frantic thoughts. She doesn't know where to go or what to do, but she knows she can't go back into that house. Not after what just happened. She walks aimlessly through the streets, her mind racing with confusion, anger, and fear. How could her father, the man she trusted and loved more than anyone, betray her like this? How could he twist their relationship into something so grotesque? Hours pass as Copi wanders through the neighborhood, her thoughts spinning in endless circles. She knows she has to confront the situation, but the thought of returning home fills her with dread. Eventually, exhausted and emotionally drained, she makes her way back to the house, hoping that Gage has gone to bed and she can slip inside without having to see him. When she finally arrives, the house is dark and quiet. Yisa is still out, and there's no sign of Gage. Relieved, Copi sneaks into her room and locks the door behind her, collapsing onto her bed in tears. She feels trapped, powerless to change the situation, and terrified of what might happen next. The following days are a blur of anxiety and avoidance. Copi barely speaks to her father, and when they do interact, it's awkward and strained. Gage tries to act as if nothing has changed, but the tension between them is unbearable. Copi can't stand being in the same room as him, let alone having a conversation. She considers telling her mother, but the thought of destroying her family stops her. Yisa is blissfully unaware of the growing chasm between her husband and daughter, and Copi doesn't want to be the one to tear everything apart. But the weight of the secret is crushing her, and she knows she can't keep living like this. Then, one evening, the inevitable happens. Copi is in the living room, trying to focus on a book, when her mother comes home unexpectedly early from a night out. Yisa walks in on Gage and Copi in a moment that is too close, too intimate for comfort. The look on Yisa's face says it all. She has seen enough to know that something is terribly wrong. "What's going on here?" Yisa asks, her voice trembling with confusion and fear. Copi freezes, her heart pounding in her chest. Gage looks equally startled, but he quickly recovers, putting on a calm, reassuring expression. "Nothing, Yisa," he says smoothly. "We were just talking." But Yisa isn't convinced. She looks between them, her eyes filled with suspicion and hurt. "This doesn't look like just talking," she says, her voice rising. "What's going on, Copi?" And in that moment, everything falls apart. As soon as the words leave Yisa's mouth, the weight of everything crashes down on Copi. The room feels like it's spinning as her mind races, searching for an escape, but there is none. Her mother stands there, waiting for an explanation, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear, confusion, and betrayal. Gage, on the other hand, remains disturbingly calm, as if he believes he can control the situation with a few smooth words. "Yisa, you're misunderstanding," Gage says, stepping toward her, his voice too casual for the gravity of the moment. "Copi and I were just having a heart-to-heart. You know how close we are." But Yisa's eyes narrow, and the doubt deepens. "Close?" she repeats, her voice sharp with suspicion. "What kind of heart-to-heart requires you both to be sitting that close? I've noticed the tension between you two for a while now, but I thought I was imagining things. Now I see I wasn't." Copi feels like she's going to be sick. Every word her mother says cuts into her like a knife. She wants to say something, to defend herself, but her voice is stuck in her throat. The guilt, the shame, the fear, it's all too much. She had never meant for things to go this far, but now it's too late. The truth is about to come out, whether she's ready for it or not. Gage's calm demeanor finally begins to crack. "Yisa, please," he says, his voice firmer now. "You're overreacting. Nothing inappropriate has happened." Yisa looks between the two of them, her face pale as the pieces begin to fall into place. She turns her gaze to Copi, her eyes filled with hurt. "Copi," she says softly, "what's going on? Tell me the truth." The desperation in her mother's voice breaks something inside of Copi. She can't lie anymore, she can't pretend that everything is fine. The weight of the secret has become unbearable, and she knows that keeping it any longer will only destroy her further. I don't know how it happened," Copi stammers, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started with small things, touches, looks, but it got worse. I didn't know how to stop it. Tears stream down her face as she speaks, her body trembling with the force of her confession. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Yisa's face contorts in disbelief, her body stiffening as Copi's words sink in. "No," she whispers, shaking her head as if trying to deny the reality of what she's just heard. "No, this can't be true. Gage, no." But the truth is undeniable now. Gage, seeing that there's no way to talk his way out of this, steps forward, his voice steady but colder than before. "Yisa, it's not what you think," he says, still trying to maintain control. "Yes, things went too far, but it wasn't what you're imagining. It was just an emotional moment." "An emotional moment?" Yisa repeats, her voice breaking with anger. "She's your daughter. How could you? How could both of you let this happen?" Her voice rises in pitch, a mixture of rage and disbelief. The raw pain in her eyes is unbearable for Copi to witness. Yisa steps back, almost stumbling as she puts more distance between herself and Gage, as if the physical space will help her process the betrayal. "You've ruined everything," Yisa finally says, her voice trembling. "I trusted you both. How could you do this to me? To our family?" Copi's heart shatters at the sight of her mother's devastation. The guilt consumes her as she watches Yisa crumble before her eyes, the strength and grace that once defined her mother now replaced by the weight of betrayal. Copi wants to explain, to justify what happened, but there's no explanation that will make any of this right. She knows that the lines have been crossed, and there's no going back. Gage tries to approach Yisa again, but she recoils, her face twisted with disgust. "Don't touch me," she hisses. "Don't ever touch me again." For the first time, Gage seems to understand the full extent of the damage. His face hardens, and his calm facade slips away. He looks at Copi, but there's no longer any warmth in his eyes. He's angry now, not at Yisa, but at Copi, as if blaming her for the situation they're in. "You shouldn't have said anything," Gage mutters under his breath, his voice low but filled with bitterness. "We could have worked this out. Now you've ruined everything." Copi flinches at his words, the coldness of his tone cutting deep. In that moment, she realizes how little she truly meant to him. It was never about love or connection, it was about control, about having power over her. And now that she's spoken the truth, she's no longer of any use to him. Yisa, still reeling from the shock, turns to Copi, her eyes filled with tears. "You have to leave," she says quietly, her voice barely audible. "What?" Copi asks, her voice shaking. "Mom, You have to go," Yisa repeats, louder this time. I can't look at you right now. I need you to leave this house." The finality in her mother's words hits Copi like a physical blow. She looks at her mother, desperate for forgiveness, for some kind of understanding, but all she sees is pain and betrayal. Yisa's decision is clear. Copi has to go. With trembling hands, Copi nods and walks toward her room. She gathers a few belongings, not even sure where she'll go, but knowing that she can't stay here anymore. The home that once felt safe and secure is now suffocating, filled with the wreckage of broken trust and shattered relationships. As she walks past the living room for the last time, she catches a glimpse of her parents. Yisa is standing by the window, her back turned, while Gage sits on the couch, staring blankly at the floor. The family that once seemed so perfect is now fractured beyond repair. Copi leaves the house, her heart heavy with guilt and regret. The night air is cold against her skin as she walks aimlessly through the empty streets. She has no idea where she's going, no plan for what comes next. All she knows is that she has destroyed her family, and there's no way to fix it. The weight of her actions presses down on her with every step, but she knows that she must live with the consequences. The secret she shared with her father has torn everything apart, and the damage is irreversible. In the days that follow, Copi tries to make sense of what happened. She reflects on how things escalated so quickly, how the boundaries between father and daughter became blurred, leading to the ultimate betrayal. She wishes she could turn back time, that she could have stopped things before they went too far, but it's too late. Eventually, Copi moves in with a friend, trying to start fresh, but the past haunts her. The guilt eats away at her, and the judgment from others, both spoken and unspoken, is constant. She knows she will never fully escape the shadow of what happened. As time passes, Copi reflects on the importance of boundaries, of keeping relationships clear and safe, especially within a family. She wishes she had seen the signs earlier, that she had stopped the progression before it led to the complete collapse of her life and her family's. Her story, she realizes, is not just her own, it's a cautionary tale for others. A warning of the profound consequences that come from crossing lines that should never be crossed. And while she can never undo what has been done, she hopes that by telling her story, others may avoid the same fate.